What's going on, GBA fans? My name is Berk, and today we will be bringing you the Week 4 weekly recap for the GBA Season 5. Of course, I'm not alone. I am joined by Monotooi.
Hi everybody, my name is Monotooi. Good to be here with you once again, Berk.
This was a very interesting week. There were a lot of predictions, at least for the Pick'em crew, that everybody got wrong. Different than what we thought was going to happen, which makes for a very exciting week, because you never know who's really going to win. The first battle of the week, we have the San Francisco Giants, coached by Gio, versus the New York Yankees, coached by Shady. The Giants brought Entei, Mega Pinsir, Ditto, Amoonguss, Blissey, and Latias. The Yankees brought Jirachi, Melodic, Gramble, Sharpedo, Zygarde, and Mismagius. This was an extremely short battle. I think it was like 12 to 15 turns. It starts out with Entei against the Jirachi. Entei goes for an eruption as the Melodic comes in. Shady is thrown off by special Entei, goes for the Scald as Entei sets up a sunny day. Weakness policy goes off, and now Entei is there to kind of just break through Shady's team really quickly. He's got Eruption for the Jirachi and the Granbull. He's got Hidden Power Ice for the Zygarde, and he's got Solar Beam for the Melodic. He Solar Beams the Melodic, killing it off really easy. He then Hidden Power Ices the Zygarde and Eruptions the Granbull, dealing massive, just tearing a massive hole in the Yankees team. The Sharpedo comes in to get the Entei out of there. Amoonguss comes in. Sharpedo's not doing really any damage to that. Shady trying to at least get some damage on his team, brings in Mismagius as Ditto is brought in, which transforms the Mismagius. It's Choice Scarf Ditto. It's able to get 2 Shadow Balls off from the Mismagius, but it does take a Shadow Ball itself, taking pretty good damage. Sharpedo comes in, gets the 1 kill of the week for the Yankees, and then Mega Pinsir is just allowed to come in and just clean up shop from there. Really short battle. Shady was so convinced it was going to be a physical Entei that even after he saw Eruption, he was still like, it's a physical Entei, it's a physical Entei. Once you see that, you got to say, nah, this is a special Entei. And then he's got to realize, I don't have anything for the special Entei. Should have you brought Rotom? I know I saw like comments on his video saying, why didn't you bring Rotom Heat? That would have walled a special Entei, no problem. And I'm thinking, who predicts a special Entei? And that set was just absolutely perfect for this match. Gio knew once he saw the team and no Rotom Heat that he's just able to bring in the Entei, and that can just deal massive damage right away. I just want to say, really good battle for Gio. Shady, I think he was really frazzled by the special Entei set, so he made some questionable decisions in terms of switching, but honestly, once that Entei came out and got the weakness policy off, you knew it was going to do big damage. Shady did not have a switch in for it, and that was just pretty much game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Did Shady play poorly? Yes. Did he prep poorly? A little bit. I don't think it was too terrible. I think just the Entei in the beginning kind of threw him off, as I think anyone would be. The reason why he went into Granbull in the first place was because he kind of had a brain fart and thought that Eruption was actually a physical move, so he went out into Granbull to get him back to the Intimidate. Also, some people could say, in hindsight, he should have gone out to the Sharpedo immediately, protected, made sure he outsped, and then go for the Waterfall or the Crunch. Still would do a decent amount of damage, even with the sun up. But again, because Entei was still at +1, Sharpedo is frail as all hell. It's going to go down to a +1 E-Speed regardless, so it was a really tough decision on Shady's part. Going to the Zygarde makes more sense, because it obviously resists the Fire Stab. It resists pretty much every hit that an Entei would normally run, the Stone Edge, etc. Again, sure, he made plenty of mistakes after that happened, but obviously Shady's going to be flustered, because you see Eruption, Solar Beam, Entei, you kind of are traumatized for a little bit. Your brain's not working properly. You're going to make mistakes. Sure, going to Zygarde, maybe you should have expected HP Ice, just because he knew then he would have no way to hit the Zygarde, but even then, if he went out to Sharpedo, protected, and tried to go for an attack, he didn't know at that point if it had the Extreme Speed. It was only after he revealed HP Ice that Shady was able to determine it didn't have E-Speed, so I don't think the poor play, quote-unquote, really would have mattered too much, because I think Gio had that game in the bag anyway. Once Melodic was gone, and once the Zygarde were gone, didn't really have much to stop the combination of Mega Pinsir, Latias, Blissey. His wall core was not going to be broken down by anything. So, again, he played kind of poorly, but it's just one match that he played kind of poorly, and it's a match where Geo brought absolutely amazing sets, so I really don't blame him for his play that much. Moving on, we have the match between the Sacramento Sea Kings and the Long Island Reggi Rockies. Hayden brought Tornadus Therian, Clefable, Slowbro, Darmanitan, Hitmonlee, and Mega Sableye, whereas Nips brought Diggersby, Feraligatr, Mega Slowbro, Chansey, Gengar, and Whimsicott. So before I get into actually what happened to this match, I do want to say Nips was extremely impressive in this match. I really didn't think Nips had a chance to beat Hayden. Not saying that Nips is necessarily bad. I didn't think the matchup was there, as I said in the last prediction part. I thought Hayden was kind of just going to overpower him. He's not going to be able to break through the wall core, etc. But he absolutely proved me wrong. Early on in the match, Mega Sableye was pressured, and it was killed off early, which allowed Nips to spam Return and Quick Attack a little bit later. Because it was an Adamant Band-Aid Diggersby, it wouldn't have been able to take 2 Earthquakes regardless, but it did at least stop Nips from being able to spam those 2 hard-hitting normal moves. A little later on in the match, Whimsicott ends up getting paralyzed by a Thunder Wave. Doesn't come into play too much, because it does not get fully paralyzed, and Prankster is able to help it out anyway. A couple points where Nips made some very good plays was switching his Diggersby out of Hayden's Tornadus. He knew right from the get-go that Diggersby was his win condition, and he needed to make sure that he didn't allow it to get any damage. Even if he was predicting the U-turn, he didn't want Diggersby to get damaged whatsoever. That way it was guaranteed to live a potential Mach Punch from Hitmonlee, so that was very smart from him. Also later on in the match, with Sableye going down, there was no way for Hayden to get rocks off the field, so it would hurt the Tornadus and Darmanitan very well, which is very important because if Nips wants to clean up with Quick Attack, which he did at the end of the game, he's going to need residual damage on things. And he's going to want damage on things switching in. It allowed Nips to see that Hayden's Clefable was unaware rather than Magic Guard, so that could have been helpful for him. Diggersby clean one-shots the Clefable with an Adamant Gunk Shot. That was... I know Diggersby is extremely powerful. I didn't expect it to do that much damage to a Clefable, but it absolutely knocked it clean out. And at that point, he really did not have a safe switch in into Gunk Shot, as you can see. The only thing that may have been able to take a hit was Slowbro at that point, but even then, you really can't risk him going for the return and getting an easy 2 a KO, because Adamant Banded Return does 2 a KO, even a physically defensive Slowbro. A little bit later on in the match, Hayden makes kind of a weird play and goes for the Calm Mind with his Slowbro on Whimsicott when it had already revealed Encore. I'm not sure if he was predicting the U-turn. It kind of worked out for him. Nips U-turns out from his Whimsicott into the Slowbro, but he should have gone out into Gengar in order to just revenge kill the Slowbro immediately, but his own Slowbro is able to take it on relatively well. The Shadow Ball is not going to be able to knock it out, and he can hit it with the Shadow Ball and then revenge it later on. Later on in the match, Darmanitan goes for a Flare Blitz against Nips' Chansey, and even though the Chansey had its Eviolite knocked off, it should have been able to take a Flare Blitz from the range it was at, as long as it was not banded, but because it did kill, I'm going to assume that it was banded or potentially Sheer Force Life Orb, which is a decent wall breaker set. So the Chansey did go down to the Flare Blitz. Not a super huge deal, because Nips did have his Scarfed Gengar to come in. Even if Darm was Scarfed, didn't matter, Gengar would have been able to pick it off with a move from that point, and Hayden did not have a safe switch into the Shadow Ball. After that, Feraligatr is going to come in. This is a little bit later in the match. It's Feraligatr versus Slowbro. Feraligatr has the Lumberry, so Nips is not too afraid of potential T-Waves or Scald Burns, so he's able to take out the Slowbro, goes for Crunch one turn, then Waterfall, then knocks it out with another Crunch. Again, Hayden has no more switch-ins to this thing. Hayden's last potential check to Diggersby is gone. His only chance is if he can somehow live a Quick Attack from the Banded Diggersby, which, as we saw later on, especially at -1 defense, it was not going to be able to take one. After Hitmonlee gets its Fake Out Unburden boost and knocks out the Feraligatr, Diggersby just comes in, Quick Attacks, takes out the Hitmonlee, and takes out the Tornadus, and that is going to be a good game to Nips. Like I said earlier, Nips was very, very impressive. He knew exactly what he needed to do to get his Diggersby to win. He had to get rid of the Mega Sableye, that way he can spam Return later on. He needed to weaken the checks, being really only his Slowbro, and then he just got a relatively safe switch into Diggersby and just spammed the move he needed to win.
Yeah, Nips is playing... He's really stepped it up since last season. I'm very impressed. His playing this week, I think he played the Whimsicott extremely well. Whimsicott's one of those things that everyone's like, is it actually going to do anything? But being able to just kind of shut down walls with Prankster Encore, even when paralyzed, it doesn't hit extremely hard, but it was able to really annoy Hayden's walls and force switches. And that's what he needed to do, because you look at Clefable, you look at Slowbro, Mega Sableye, you look at all of those, and they're able to set up Calm Minds, and no one wants that. No one wants them to set up Calm Mind, so you encore them into the Calm Mind and then force a switch out. And I think Nips used that very well. Everyone on the Pick'em crew proved us all wrong, took home the win this week. Hayden's planning, I wasn't overly impressed with it. I think he's kind of planning himself into a box, as Tom likes to say. He's bringing the strong defense, but he's bringing it every week. He can't separate the core because that defensive core together is really strong. Apart, it's much, much, much weaker. He's planning kind of standardly, and it's making it easy to plan for his team. He's definitely going to have to switch that up in future weeks if he's going to be a really big contender in the future.
Yep, absolutely. One thing I would like to point out, you mentioned how he could have encored the Mega Sableye. Encore is actually bounced back with Magic Bounce, so that would have worked.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem. I mean, regardless, you're not going to switch a Mega Sableye in on a Whimsicott anyway because of the Stab Moon Blast, so it's totally fine.
Yeah. Next we have the Detroit Steelwings, coached by Crimson Seabat, versus the Pittsburgh Piratas, coached by Old Man Tup. If I pronounce that wrong again, I'm sorry, Tup. Crimson brought Staraptor, Suicune, Infernape, Dusclops, Audino, and Electros. Tup brought Excadrill, Machamp, Celebi, Thunderous Eye, Kyurem, and Jellicent. This was an extremely close match. First turn was so good for Crimson. Excadrill goes for a Rock Slide, it misses the Staraptor. Both of them were Scarfed, except the Excadrill was Jolly Choice Scarfed, and I think the Staraptor was Adamant Choice Scarfed. So the Excadrill was actually able to outspeed. It goes for the Rock Slide, misses, gets taken out with close combat. Immediately it's looking like Crimson has the upper hand. But just because the Excadrill goes down doesn't mean Tup's down for the count. Crimson doesn't play too well around the Thundurus. He lets his AV get knocked off on the Electros. Staraptor gets fully paired, which means he's then going to have to bring in the Audino and Heal Bell. If you can avoid it, you don't want to have to lose momentum by going for Heal Bell. The Thundurus paralyzes Staraptor, and then the Staraptor gets fully paralyzed right after. If it didn't, the Thundurus would have gone down, and then the Heal Bell, he could have Heal Belled the Staraptor, and then all's good. But the Thundurus gets to stick around to paralyze the Staraptor later. Crimson didn't seem to have, besides the Staraptor, he didn't have great ways to deal with the Celebi. He's able to Toxic with the Audino, it racks up damage, he doesn't switch out, which is surprising because it does have Natural Cure, it would have been cured of the Toxic. It gets really worn down, and Tup does save it for Death Fodder later on. The Staraptor was the only thing that could really take care of Celebi, because the Suicune, although it does have Shadow Ball, does not want to take on the Celebi, you know, grass and all that. Infernape was not running U-turn nor Fire Move, so it couldn't really hit it. Dusclops did, I think, have Infestation, so that would have been something. Audino really can't. I mean, it Toxics it, but, you know, Celebi has Natural Cure, and Electros had Knockoff, which could deal some damage, but again, it's not great. Celebi almost goes down. Tup saves it for Death Fodder. The Dusclops comes in, traps the Machamp. There's some knockoff rest stall, but unfortunately for Crimson, Machamp is able to knock off crit the Dusclops, taking it out, freeing it from the infestation. Staraptor comes in and just absolutely ends its life because Machamp is not taking a Brave Bird from Staraptor. Thundurus comes in, but gets the pair off on the Staraptor. Audino's not at a great amount of health right now, so it's going to be very hard for him to bring it in. And Heal Bell, while it's paralyzed, he might have been able to Heal Bell it off, but he lets the Staraptor go down, which was a pretty big win condition for him. That was a really good way to deal with Kyurem. You switch it in, go for the close combat, take the Kyurem down. Granted, Tup still has a Jellicent, so Audino was able to live a hit from Choice Specs Kyurem. Choice Specs Kyurem was such a great set to run this week. It just kind of ran through a lot of Crimson's team. It was able to kill the Staraptor, the Audino, and the Suicune, because nothing really wanted to switch in on a Choice Specs Draco Meteor. Even Suicune at +1 was still 2-code by it at the health it was at. Granted, we do get to a point where Suicune is in on the Jellicent. Suicune sets up a Calm Mind, and then Shadow Balls the Jellicent, and the Shadow Ball gets Curse-Bodied first turn. This was big because if it didn't get Curse-Bodied, he could Shadow Ball again, take out the Jellicent, and then while, yes, the Kyurem would take out the Suicune, Infernape could come back in and Stone Edge the Kyurem and take that out. But because it was Cursed Body, he's not able to take out the Jellicent. His Infernape can't touch it, and the Suicune without Shadow Ball can't touch it. At that point, he could have also just kept setting up Calm Minds instead. If he set up a few more Calm Minds, he would have been easily able to take anything the Kyurem wants to throw at it. And once the Cursed Body wears off, then just Shadow Ball the Jellicent. That's hindsight. He tried to get rid of the Jellicent as best he could. He couldn't. Once the Suicune goes down, all he's left with the Infernape and a Jellicent. Infernape can't touch the Jellicent. It's pretty much game for Tup. He recovers with Jellicent. Jellicent's then able to Scald. Infernape barely lives and then is taken out the next turn. Really good match from both. I think Crimson could have had it at the end, but who knows? You know, it's hard to tell. If he set up another Calm Mind, would he have won? It's very possible. I think it was a very good game on both ends. And they really stepped it up from last week, you know. Tup getting a big 5-0 loss, and then he's really picked up his game for this week. And same with Crimson. You know, he didn't get 5-0'd last week, but I think they both played very well.
Absolutely. The turn 1 Rock Slide was, I think, bigger than a lot of people think. The damage that he would have gotten off with Rock Slide would have done over 75%. The Excadrill would have gone down, and then as soon as Tup steps up rocks, that thing is dead upon switch-in, because the Steelwings do not have any form of hazard removal this week. Staraptor is not their defogger for a very good reason. Common theme I see in Crimson's loss is him letting go of his Electros early. It was hard to switch into Thunder, so I can understand it, especially at that point it was a mixed Thundurus with knockoff. The Assault Vest was gone. It would have been taking a good amount of damage from it. So that was kind of unfortunate because Electros did put in a decent amount of work versus Tup's team. Dealing with the Jellicent, even the Celebi potentially, things like that. Like you said, the knockoff crit onto the Dusclops from Machamp, it was unfortunate, but I think the Dusclops was going to go down to the Machamp regardless. It would have gone for the rest, gotten back to full health, and then would have been 3 KO'd at that point. Crimson didn't really have a super safe switch-in to Machamp. Suicune doesn't really want to lose its item. Neither does Audino. Really, nothing really wants to. Infernape is not going to be a super safe switch-in because that's still going to take a lot of damage. Plus, it was easily revenge killed by Staraptor afterwards anyway. The big part of this match was the end game. Suicune goes for a Calm Mind, goes for a Shadow Ball onto the Jellicent, and gets Cursed Body Hacks. I'm personally am amazed Tup decided to bring Cursed Body this week instead of Water Absorb when you know your opponent has a Suicune. If I were Crimson, I definitely would not have expected that at all, because otherwise you kind of just spam Scald and hope for burns on things. I can understand, like, he has a Celebi, so he already has a safe switch into Scald, but as we saw, Celebi was not super useful. Regardless, it worked out for Tup totally fine. He was able to take another Shadow Ball, eventually taunt the Suicune, and then beat it later on. It worked out for him. Thankfully, Infernape was not running Thunder Punch. If it was, I believe he would have been able to knock out the Jellicent. That would have been a win for Crimson, but he was running Stone Edge as his best move to hit it, and it just ended up going to Tup.
Probably one of the closest matches this week. It literally came down to the wire. That Jellicent almost went down, and if he did get a crit to Stone Edge, we'd be looking at a different winner this week.
Moving on, we have the match between John and the New Orleans Pelipers and Dan, coach of the St. Louis Rampardos. On John's side, we have Donphan, Chandelure, Reuniclus, Virizion, Mega Scizor, and Lantern. Whereas for Dan, we have the Mega Aggron, the Sylveon, Victini, Blastoise, Salamence, and Jolteon. So, looking real quick, looking at Dan's team, when you have powerhouses like Mega Aggron, Sylveon, Victini, Salamence, and Jolteon, you really don't expect something like a regular Blastoise to do as much work as it did, but Blastoise did get 3 kills and 1 death, proving that it does have value in this format. It was actually a very big annoyance to John's team. The things that could kind of safely switch in were Virizion and Reuniclus to Scald. Donphan, Chandelure obviously do not want to take it. Lantern can. Blastoise very bulky, Lantern not very strong, so Volt switches are not going to be doing too much damage. He did get lucky switching a Mega Scizor into the Blastoise, because if that Mega Scizor got burned, it was very likely going to be over for John, because Mega Scizor was a very big win condition versus Dan's team. Dan continuously switched into Victini on John's Virizion, which, if you're watching John's perspective, you saw John was close to going for the Stone Edge, but he didn't know if Dan would predict that and stay in or switch out into something that can take the Stone Edge. Realistically, I think Dan just forgot that Virizion got Stone Edge, even though he looked up the moveset and still didn't see that it got Stone Edge, so that did end up working out for Dan because he was able to take multiple Leaf Blades. Toxic damage was racking up on the Lantern, and he was able to go down to a few Shadow Balls from the Jolteon. Dan bringing us all that Jolteon this week I actually kind of liked a lot. It's immune to the Volt Switch, can get health back from it, stops Ja from spamming Volt Switch, and it can take Skulls relatively easily. Very similar to the Assault Vest Raikou set, not quite as bulky, but still did the job perfectly fine. Probably the biggest turning point was the crit on the Salamence. Not the first crit versus the Blastoise. That one didn't matter too much. The crit on the Salamence was huge. It was intimidated. It would not have done all that much damage. Salamence could have put in a pretty good chunk of work, but after it gets crit with the knockoff, it is easily in range to die from a Bullet Punch, and it does go down. Later on in the match, once again, Donphan in against the Victini, and Donphan takes the V-Create like it is nothing, takes under half from it, which I was very, very surprised to see. Victini is normally extremely strong, but he's able to take the V-Create and kill it with an Earthquake. Blastoise afterwards comes in, revenges it with a Scald, picking up its third kill. Verzion easily comes in, knocks it out with the Leaf Blade. Dan is forced to go out into his Aggron and take a lot of damage from Focus Blast. Thankfully, John did hit, otherwise Mega Aggron could have been a very big issue, especially with Scizor looking to sweep at the end. With the Aggron weakened, Scizor was able to do that. Reuniclus able to come in, take a hit, set up the Trick Room, which allows the Scizor to outspeed the Jolteon, so the Trick Room at the end, very, very crucial for John. If he did not have that, he would have been able to win the game. U-Turn was able to take out the Jolteon. Dan facing a pretty narrow defeat, a very narrow 1-0 defeat. The crits, Berk, I'm going to let you talk about the crits. How much influence do you think that had on the outcome of the match?
I think the crits definitely pushed the momentum over in John's favor. I'm never one to say, if it wasn't for the crits, Dan would have definitely won. There's no possible way to know that. The crits happened way too early in the match. It's a different match when the crits happen. Yes, you can lose because of crits, but that doesn't necessarily mean you would have won without them. So, would Dan have won without the crits? I don't know. I'm still confident that John could have still pulled out that game. But, yeah, the crits really did suck, especially the one on the Salamence. That was pretty big. But I don't know if John necessarily would have lost if he didn't get the crits, but definitely helped. I really liked how John used Trick Room towards the end. That was like beautifully done. He knew if he set up the Trick Room, Scizor would outspeed the Jolteon. He could kill off the Sylveon after it takes a Psyshock and win the game. So I was really impressed by how he used Trick Room Reuniclus, not as a sweeper itself, but setting up Scizor to get the last two kills. Moving on, we have the Real Maril, coached by Miguel, versus the Arizona Deoxys, coached by Gubbs. The Real Maril brought Mamoswine, Ferrothorn, Zapdos, Greninja, Seismitoad, and Gourgeist. Arizona Deoxys brought Zoroark, Lucario, Tentacruel, Talonflame, Gliscor, and Cradily. This was a pretty big win for Miguel and the Real Maril, picking up a 4-0, with Zapdos basically killing everything. It's the only thing on his team that got kills. Tentacruel died to its own Life Orb recoil, which how often do you see Life Orb Tentacruel, which is pretty cool. I really like that Miguel sets up the rocks immediately. Not only does it hit the Talonflame, but it basically tells him when Zoroark is disguised as Talonflame. Because there's plenty of times where Zoroark comes in, it takes about 12.5%, it's disguised as Talonflame, and it should take 50%, but it doesn't, so he always knew when the Zoroark was coming, which was, I think, very good planning on Miguel's part. He starts with the Mamoswine, sets up the rocks, gets Grass Knotted. He knew Zoroark immediately. He knows it's a special Life Orb Zoroark, so he's not worried about it. He knows what it is. Greninja comes in, scares out the Zoroark. It's a physical Greninja, very interesting set. Doesn't do terrible amounts of damage to the Tentacruel, although he was very close to going for the extra sensory. He doesn't want his rocks getting spun away, so Gourgeist is the dedicated switch into Tentacruel to prevent the rocks being spun. It's a Life Orb Tentacruel, so Ice Beam does well over half Gourgeist, but Gourgeist Shadow Sneaks the Tentacruel, bring it down very low, and then Tentacruel dies its own Life Orb as it goes for the Ice Beam on the Gourgeist. It's a double down, but it's definitely in the favor of the Real Maril, because now there's no way for Gubbs to get rid of the rocks on his side of the field, which means Talonflame is going to be very hindered, as well as he'll be able to scout out for the Zoroark. Mamoswine, Even though it wasn't going to be Miguel's win condition, he realizes that it's actually very important for him to keep alive because it dealt very well to Cradley and the Gliscor. Cradley, he didn't have too much to deal with besides Hidden Power Ice and the Zapdos. Miguel makes really good offensive double switches to get Mamo in on the Cradley, goes for the Icicle Crash as the Gliscor switches in, of all things, and the Icicle Crash misses. That would have been nice to be able to take out the Gliscor right away. Mamoswine is then forced to go for the Ice Shard, which gives a free switch into Lucario, which then forces the Mamoswine back out. Zapdos comes in and just starts going on a tear through Gubbs' team. Absolutely. Zapdos easily OHKOs the Gliscor. It deals with the Zoroark, it deals with the Lucario, it deals with the Talonflame, and revenges the Cradley after Mamoswine finally comes in on Cursed Cradley. Icicle Crash still does massive damage, and it gets revenged by the Zapdos. So the Zapdos was just absolutely his win condition. He played it perfectly. He was able to live the Flare Blitz at the end, taking out the Talonflame for the win. Gubbs really didn't have too much for Zapdos after the Tentacruel went down. Cradley kind of dealt with it, but Hidden Power Ice was still going to do quite a bit of damage to it. The match starts out pretty favorably for Gubbs, but Miguel just absolutely pulls it back through good double switching and Zapdos. And I absolutely love the rocks to scout out when Zoroark was coming in, because Zoroark, if you don't know it's a Zoroark, can put in quite a bit of work, but anytime it came in, Miguel's like, that's a Zoroark. I know it's going to be a Zoroark, I have my switch in for that. Very good playing by Miguel and the Real Maril. Great planning. And Gubbs, he's still struggling. You know, he did get his first win last week, but he's not doing too well.
Yep, he definitely is having his struggles coming back into the league. One thing I would like to point out, you said Miguel didn't really have all that much for Cradley at that point. Miguel had absolutely nothing else for Cradley. Gourgeist was not running Will-O-Wisp. It was Seed Bomb, Shadow Sneak, Skill Swap, and I believe Leech Seed. Ferrothorn was not running Gyro Ball, and Gyro Ball is not going to do anything to Curse Cradley anyway because it's gaining defense, it's losing speed. Modest HP Ice from Zapdos does about 30% to a Split F Cradley. It's not going to 2-hit KO at all. Greninja was not running anything to really deal a lot of damage to it. Seismitoad can't touch it. That Cradley, if Mamoswine was gone, had a very, very high chance to sweep his entire team. As soon as it got up to +6, it could have beaten the Ferrothorn eventually. Would have taken a while, because obviously Seed Bomb quad resisted, but a +6 would have eventually worn it down. Same thing to Zapdos. I forget if it was running Stone Edge, but even then, at +6, Seed Bomb is going to wear it down. Takes care of the Seismitoad, takes care of the Greninja, and again would have worn down the Gourgeist. So that was absolutely huge that Miguel saved his Mamoswine. This was a 4-0 win for Miguel. This easily could have been a huge win for Gubbs.
The score definitely didn't dictate how close that match was.
Now, we are moving on to the match between the Milwaukee Sawsbucks and the Cincinnati Loudreds. One of these teams is going to be getting their first win this season. Steve has Heatran, Mega Gardevoir, Sigilyph, Haxorus, Conkeldurr, and Rotom Wash, whereas the Loudreds have a Zelf, Landorus T, Mega Manectric, Weavile, Empoleon, and Dusknoir. Okay, so before we get into the match, I'm just wondering, because my memory of Steve's team builder is not up to par at the moment, Berk, why did he have Tailwind and Trick Room on his Sigilyph? I can totally understand Tailwind, because Tailwind Mega Gardevoir is absolutely scary, as well as Tailwind is pretty much all of his offensive threats.
I think he wanted the Trick Room for Conkeldurr, because if Conkeldurr in the Trick Room would actually be able to deal quite a number to Mulvone's team.
A little bit later on in the match, Steve, knowing that his opponent Mulvone has a couple Intimidate Mons, being Mega Manectric and the Landorus Therian, decides to run White Herb on his Conkeldurr. I just have a calc up real quick. A -1 Ice Punch to a Mega Manectric, which he would have been -1 without the White Herb, does 27 to 32%. That's to a standard Mega Manectric. With the White Herb being at neutral attack, it would have done 40 to 48%, which it did. It did about 48%. Got a pretty good roll with it. Really, I don't think it was worth him not running something like Assault Vest, because he's gaining about 15% more damage, but he's also taking a little bit more damage, and when you have a Conkeldurr that is as big of a win condition as it was against Mulvone, you really want that thing to have as much health as possible. Even if you are doing less damage with that one Ice Punch, if Manectric stays in, you're going to take not too much damage from a Thunderbolt, you're only taking about 30%, then you're going to Drain Punch, get some of that HP back, and you're going to beat it 1v1. Big point in the match. Mulvone switches out into his Landorus Therian, gives Conkeldurr the Intimidate drop, and Steve hits it with an Ice Punch, and almost knocks it out. If he got a little bit of a higher roll, he may have been able to knock out the Landorus, but it is what it was. Steve overpredicts and lets his Conkeldurr take a large amount of damage, almost to the point where it's knocked out, but he does live with a little bit of HP and is able to knock out the Landorus. At this point, though, Conkeldurr is completely useless. Mach Punch is out prioritized by Ice Shard from Weavile, so that'll knock it out. Really, all it's good for at that point is maybe a Mach Punch on the Empoleon, or a Mach Punch on the Manectric, etc. As we saw later on, that wasn't really super useful. So I don't really agree with Steve saving his Conkeldurr, because he did sack off Rotom. Rotom doesn't do too much for him, but it is a little bit more valuable than the Conkeldurr. The middle of the battle kind of happens. Heatran is in on a Weavile at one point. Mulvone, knowing that Weavile is crucial for his win, cannot stay in and go for the knockoff or the low kick on the Heatran. He switches out into his Dusknoir. Steve does burn the Dusknoir, not a super big deal. Dusknoir then goes for Protect, as I believe Steve goes for another Lava Plume, after which Steve predicts the Pain Split and goes out into his Conkeldurr trying to get its HP back, but is unable to do so as Mulvone instead just goes for the attack and takes it out. I don't blame Steve for that switch at all, because again, Conkeldurr really wasn't doing much, and if he had the chance to get his Conkeldurr back up to a decent amount of HP, then that would have been great, then his win condition would be back in the game, but unfortunately that did not happen. A little bit later in the match, Mega Gardevoir comes in, revenges the Empoleon that had previously killed Steve's Heatran, and unfortunately Steve is going to have to sack his Mega Gardevoir to Weavile's attack. Mega Gardevoir is going to be forced to be sacked by Weavile's Icicle Crash. Afterwards, however, Steve goes into Sigilyph, and this is the part where Steve has a chance to come back. Sigilyph comes in with the Focus Sash. Steve knows he can take any hit, takes an Ice Shard, gets up a Tailwind, and is knocked out on the following turn. This is Steve's chance to potentially pull back a sweep. Haxorus can't set up a Dragon Dance because anything he can potentially set up, because he just does not have the opportunity to. Anything that he does not kill will kill him back immediately. He takes the hit from Weavile, goes for a Dragon Claw, knocks out the Weavile. He then outrages the Manectric, and Tailwind runs out. And Steve is really sad because Azelf is able to kill the Haxorus. Steve almost pulled it back. He was very close. His original game plan of a Trick Room / Tailwind sweep almost came true, but in the end, a couple bad over-predictions kind of cost him the game, as they tend to do.
First, I think Steve was a victim to the rolls this week. He gets a low roll on the Landorus, which means he can't take it out with an Ice Punch. The Landorus literally lived on about, 4. So there's a low roll there. And then when he's in with his Heatran versus the Empoleon does, 70-something, 80-something, and Heatran's up to 92 HP, goes for the Scald on the Heatran, and it takes the Heatran out because of a high roll. That high roll meant that Weavile gets one more hit of Life Orb because it doesn't have to take out the Heatran. Weavile is able to live. If it took one more hit of Life Orb, it would have died to its own Life Orb when it went for the Ice Shard on the Haxorus, which meant that Steve would have been able to set up a Dragon Dance, and then it would have outsped the Azelf outside of Tailwind. Yeah, Steve made a few over-predictions. It's hard to tell what your opponent's going to do. I think Steve played well, though, and it was he was so close. I can't criticize Steve, really, for how he played. I think he played well this week. I didn't see terrible it wasn't oh my god, he's making so many over-predictions. I thought he played pretty well. The Sigilyph set probably dropped the Trick Room for maybe some move that can hit the Weavile, and I think he would have been in a much better place. But again, that is complete hindsight. He thought he would be able to get the Trick Room for the Conkeldurr, and if he was able to get Conkeldurr up in Trick Room, that would have definitely done a massive damage to Mulvone's team. That's a very, very hard set to pull off, both Trick Room and Tailwind. But overall, good match on both ends, and Mulvone's able to pick up his first win. So moving on, we have the San Francisco Arcan Niners, coached by George, versus the Boston Red Sox, coached by Nick. George brought Nidoqueen, Megalopunny, Rotom, Gothitelle, Scizor, and Bronzong. And Nick brought the Cresselia, Mega Audino, Nidoking, Manaphy, Sneasel, and Skarmory. Nick still bringing that pretty disgusting defense. Cresselia, Mega Audino, and Skarmory, that is just still absolutely disgusting. George, I think, had the better matchup this week. Right in the beginning of the match, Skarmory is able to set up 2 layers of spikes as Bronzong does set up its own rocks. Goth comes in on the Skarm, and it's looking like, well, Gothitel's already going to be able to trap the Skarmory, but I think the Skarmory had Shed Shell, so it's able to switch out into the Audino, which does take quite a bit of damage from a T-Bolt. Turns out to be not a defensive, but more of an offensive variant. Nidoqueen comes in, sets up some T-Spikes. That's going to pressure Skarm to go for Defog eventually. A little bit later on, we have Nidoking in, and George brings in his Scarfed Goth to trap the Nidoking, goes for a side shot, gets a high roll, takes it out. Nidoking was one of the biggest offensive pressures on Nick's team for George, and now that's gone due to a high roll. However, it still would have put Nidoking easily in revenge kill range for pretty much anything. Scizor, Bullet Punch, doesn't really matter. Once the Nidoking is gone, Sneasel comes in, Pursuit traps to Goth. Gothitel's locked into Side Shot, can't do anything. So either switches out, dies to Pursuit, stays in, dies to Pursuit. So Sneasel takes out the Goth. Mega Lopunny, though, is just absolutely walled the crap out of by Cresselia. Cresselia doesn't care about anything the Mega Lopunny has to do, except the Mega Lopunny was running Encore and Power Up Punch. Could have Encored Cresselia into Moonlight, Power Up Punched it to get to like +4, and then possibly taken out with a return, but even then, Mega Lopunny would have taken a lot of damage to Rocky Helmet. George switches out, really, you can't do much to Cresselia. Mega Audino comes in. Mega Audino, for some reason, goes for the Healing Wish into Sneasel, which wasn't even damaged. I guess it was for some offensive momentum. He Healing Wishes, goes into Sneasel, and Nidoqueen's out. Sneasel goes for the Iso Crash, misses the Nidoqueen. Sneasel goes down to Toxic. Without Sneasel, Nick is going to have a very hard time dealing with the Bronzong, because now Nidoking's gone, Sneasel's gone. Those are the 2 things that could possibly hit it for super effective damage. Now he's got to somehow use Manaphy to take it out, but Nidoqueen is in with a decent amount of HP. In comes the Manaphy. Manaphy cannot take it out with Scald because it is a defensive set for Manaphy this week. Nidoqueen does massive damage with a Thunderbolt. Rotom comes in, can easily revenge the Manaphy. All Nick is left with is Cresselia and Skarmory. George has his Volt Turn Core and can just keep switching around on Nick's team. Granted, Nick does have Spikes up. Scizor would eventually go down for this, but at the end of the game, there is a DC. Nick and George both agreed it would be a 3-0 win in George's favor. Scizor would eventually go down to Spikes, but Rotom can deal with both the Cresselia and the Skarmory. George would have won probably 3-0. George had a lot of things to deal with Nick's team. Gothitelle was played very well this week. George knows how to use Gothitelle, knows when to bring it in, and knows how to KO some things with it. Choice Scarf Gothitelle worked very well. Nick, though, he's bringing a lot of walls. 3, like, just straight walls. Mega Audino, kind of offensive this week, but still, it's not going to be doing too much damage. And then Nidoking, Manaphy, and Sneasel. Once the Nidoking and Sneasel went down, there was no breaking through George's defense at that point.
Yep, and that's the thing about George's team. A lot of people give George's teams a lot of crap because there are some kind of obvious holes, being his team's kind of slow, other than Mega Lopunny and things like that, but that's what George's teams does. You use Gothitelle to take out one of the threats on your opponent's team. You either let your Wall Core deal with your opponent's threats, or you let your offense now run rampant on your opponent's team because the one thing that your opponent had to stop it is now trapped and killed. I agree, George was playing exceptionally, as George has been doing most of the season. The Volt Turn Core at the end, that was really good. The Icicle Crash miss, I originally thought it was huge, potentially stopped the Volt Turning at the end, obviously because Sneasel can knock off the Rotom. It's a regular Scizor, still going to be taking a decent amount from the Life Orb knockoff from Sneasel, but as I saw it, Scizor just bullet punches it and kills it. It can still go for a U-turn, it can take the hit U-turn, and then as soon as Sneasel's gone, really all you have is a slightly weakened Scizor, and you can still go for the U-turn full switch combination and deal with it at the end. Yeah, you summarized it very well. Also would like to point out, Surf would have killed Nidoqueen, so Surf is obviously better. Nick, I think you should run Surf every week.
Then I'll get that Ice Punch freeze on the Manaphy. And then people will say, why don't you run Scald?
Exactly. Finishing up with that match, we are now going to move on to the match between the Atlanta Hooluchas and the Borussia Donphan. This week, Fizz has brought Mega Charizard Y, Heliolisk, Togekiss, Weezing, Starmie, and Leavanny, whereas Lars has brought his Landorus Incarnate, Slowking, Mega Absol, Tangrowth, Cobalion, and Scolipede. So looking at the matchup, Lars' team actually matches up against Fizz's very well. Landorus I, very huge threat as you can see. Assault Vest Slowking, one of like the 3 things on the planet that can take 2 hits from a Mega Charizard Y. Only takes about 40% from a max special attack Solar Beam, that's very impressive. Tank hits from the Togekiss, tank hits from the Weezing, Starmie. So that Assault Vest Slowking just gonna be fat, and it's gonna be around for a while. Earlier on in the match, it was Landorus I versus the Togekiss. Now, there was a DC later on in the match, but I'm not gonna go over that too much because the game was recreated basically exactly how it should have been. Earlier on in the match, Togekiss goes for the HP Ice onto the Landorus. Landorus goes for a Rock Slide beforehand, misses, which is going to be a very common theme for this match. Goes for the Rock Slide, misses, and gets hit by an HP Ice from the Togekiss. That HP Ice not killing was absolutely huge for Lars. As you can see, Landorus I gets 4 kills. It was a huge offensive threat. If Landorus went down that turn, I don't think he could have pulled it back because Lando, huge win condition. Thankfully also for Lars, he doesn't necessarily need it healthy, if that makes any sense. What I mean is, Fizz did not bring any hazards this week, so he doesn't have to fear switching it in on rocks. Fizz did not bring any priority this week, so he doesn't have to keep it at a certain amount of HP so he can take a Sucker Punch or anything like that. That's not going to be an issue for him. So basically, having a Landorus I at 2% is almost as valuable as having it at 100%. A little bit later on in the match, Scolipede baton passes a speed boost into Lars' Landorus Incarnate, which outspeeds his entire team. He does not have a Scarf Starmie, a Scarf Heliolisk to outspeed it. But once again, misses Rock Slide, really hurting Lars. He had some potential to win the game at that point had he not continuously missed every rock move he went for. Because Fizz does not have Stealth Rocks on his team and does not have him on his opponent's side of the field, Lars can just switch out, save his Landorus as many times as he need to. He goes out into his Assault Vest Slowking with the Togekiss facing it and takes absolutely nothing from an Air Slash. Assault Vest Slowking is so bulky. A little bit later, Mega Absol is in versus Fizz's Togekiss. And just trying to get damage off on the Togekiss, Absol goes for the Stone Edge. Fizz knows that he needs to keep his Togekiss healthy, so he switches out into the Weezing. Fizz is the Stone Edge, so once again, rock moves not working. Lars may want to drop his Absol for maybe be a regular Absol with Focus Lens, just because this match is absolutely ridiculous on that front. But despite the hacks, like the continuous misses, Fizz is still in a not very good position. As long as Lars has his Landorus Incarnate, he is going to have a really hard time predicting around it, and he's going to have a very hard time actually beating it. Return on Leavanny would have been able to take out the Scolipede on 1 or 2 separate occasions, which was very important because that means Scolipede would not have been able to baton pass a speed boost into the Landorus. A little bit later on in the match, Fizz switches in his Leavanny on the Slowking and takes a lot of damage. This was partially a mistake on Fizz's part. I think he should have sacked off the Charizard. It really wasn't doing all that much for Fizz at that point, just because pretty much everything outsped it other than the Slowking, which tanks hits from it regardless. But we're getting to the end game here. All Lars has to do is get rid of the Togekiss, and he can clean up with the Landorus, which thankfully he was able to do. Very end game, it is Lars' Mega Absol versus Fizz's Togekiss. Lars finally able to hit a Stone Edge onto the Togekiss. Does not knock it out, unfortunately, but it does enough damage to the point where after sacking the Absol to the Air Slash, Lars is just able to go out into his Lando, click Rock Slide, and then win the game.
This was a very hacksy battle, but Lars was able to pull it through. First turn looked very good for Fizz. Life Orb Focus Blast on the Cobalion takes it out, which means there's going to be no rocks on Fizzy's side. That's very good for him because he's got Mega Charizard, which is weak to it, Togekiss, which is weak to it, and Leavanny, which is weak to it. So it gives him the ability to switch in and out, which is very nice for him, although Fizz also didn't bring any rocks. I don't know why there were so many rock slide misses. I think Landorus and Absol need to train the mountains a little bit more. But he misses the first rock slide, and if he just landed one of the rock slides, just one, I think he would have been able to sweep the Landers much, much earlier, and probably make this instead of a 3-0, possibly like a 4-0, because his only switch in to the Landers was a Togekiss at full health. One, if Lars had rocks up from the beginning, Togekiss wouldn't even be able to switch in, because it switches in on rocks and cannot take a rock slide. Nothing can take a rock slide, and especially if Landers is at +1, it outspeeds the entire team and basically just sweeps. He did have one thing that was fast in the Landorus, and that was a Chlorophyll Leavanny. You said with the Landorus at 4% or whatever, it still is valuable. If Fizz towards the end actually sacked off the Mega Charizard, set up the Sun, and then switched into Leavanny, it's possible with return he might have been able to sweep, because Cobalion was the only thing that could really take hits, and that's down. Slowking, Mega Absol, and Tangrowth all take big damage from X-Scissor, and the Tangrowth even went down to a Flamethrower. Landorus isn't taking a hit. And if Scolipede, if he had returned, Scolipede would have gotten taken down too. So it's possible that he could have counter-sweep with Leavanny, and that would have been very fantastic to watch. I've never seen Leavanny sweep, but...
I've never seen Leavanny do anything successful, honestly.
Yeah, but I think Fizz has the team to actually make Leavanny shine, because he does have, Mega Charizard Y, can set the Sun, and do stuff with it besides slapping a Focus Sash on it, setting up the Sticky Webs, and letting it die. Good game, a lot of hacks, but, this is the game we play. Really good planning on Lars's part. Fizz, he said he didn't even plan that well this week. I think he's going to bounce back. Fizz is a very good player with a very good team, so I think he's going to... This was a little bit of a loss, but I think he's going to pull it back.
Absolutely. I think he's going to come back next week strong. Something I would like to point out before we close out this battle, Lars going for Earth Power. I know I kind of explained this earlier on. Lars Earth Powering the Togekiss, he wasn't making any crazy prediction. The battle originally DC'd, so they were just trying to recreate him missing a rock slide.
Moving on, we have the league standings. In the Kanto Conference Red Division, we have still at number 1, even with the loss. We have the Atlanta Hooluchas, 3-win, 1 loss, with a +5 differential. At second, we have the New Orleans Pelipers, 3 wins, 1 loss, with a +4 differential. So close. Right behind them, we have the New York Yankees, 2 wins, 2 losses, with a -1 differential. Not too far behind. And then now trailing, we still have the Detroit Steelwings, 0 wins, 4 losses, -10 differential. Crimson got to start pulling out those wins if he wants to catch up. But the top 3, it's very close so far.
Definitely. As you said, the season is progressing, so the gap between first and last in each division is becoming quite larger. But there is definitely still time for him to come back if he plays exceptionally.
There is a gap in each division, except for the next one.
That is right. We are going to be going over the blue division. We have Lars of the Borussia Donphan in first place with 3 wins, 1 loss, and a +5 differential. Next up, we have Gym Leader Geo with another big win this week. 2 wins, 2 losses, and a +5 differential as well. Then we have Dan of the St. Louis Rampardos. Same win-loss record, 2-2, but with a +4 differential. And lastly, we have Old Man Tup, coach of the Pittsburgh Pirata Tendinitises, with 2 wins and 2 losses, with a -4 differential. So even though Tup's differential is suffering a little bit lower than the rest, he is right there with everyone else in that division.
Yeah, no, this is the closest division. 1 win separates first and last. That's crazy. Moving on to the Johto Conference. In the Gold Division, at number 1, we have the Boston Red Sox, 3 wins, 1 loss, with a +9 differential, the highest in the league right now. Crazy, crazy. Even after that loss, he's still at number 1 with the highest differential. At number 2, we have the Long Island Reggi Rockies, 2 wins, 2 losses, a -1 differential. At number 3, we have the Arizona Deoxys, 1 win, 3 losses with a -11 differential. And in last, we have the Milwaukee Sawsbucks, 0 wins, 4 losses, and a -9 differential. There was a mistake last time. I know it said -9 differential last time. He had a -8 differential. He lost 1-0 this week. Now he's a -9 differential. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I really like how the wins and losses kind of line up there perfectly. 3-2, 1-0, 1-2, 3-4. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Silver Division, we have Miguel, coach of the Real Maril, in first place. 3 wins, 1 loss with a +8 differential. Then we have George of the San Francisco Arcan Niners, 3 wins, 1 loss, and a +4 differential, so right behind Miguel. Then you have Hayden of the Sacramento Sea Kings, 2 wins, 2 losses, and a -2 differential. And then in last place in the Silver Division, we have Mulvone, coach of the Cincinnati Loudreds, with 1 win, 3 losses, and a -4 differential. This one, aside from the Blue Division, probably the second closest, I would say.
Yeah, this is also an extremely close race. Mulvone kind of trailing, but it's only by 1 loss. But he's right behind the Sacramento Sea Kings. So, moving on, we have the league leaders. Which Pokemon netting the most kills? Well, number 1, we have Manaphy still, of the Boston Red Sox, coached by Nick. 10 kills, 3 deaths, +7 differential. It is still dominating. Crazy how well Manaphy's doing. At number 2, we have Entei of the San Francisco Giants, coached by Gio. Try saying that 5 times fast.
Finally, a mascot pick does something.
9 kills, 2 deaths, and a +7 differential. He is using Entei extremely well. And at number 3, after its impressive 5 kills, we have Zapdos of the Real Maril, coached by Miguel, with 8 kills, 2 deaths, and a +6 differential. Zapdos was up in the top 3 in the D-League, and now it's back up there in the regular season.
Yep, and moving on to number 4, we have Landers Incarnate, coached by the Borussia Donphan. 7 kills, 2 deaths, and a +5 differential. After that, we have Mega Manectric of the Cincinnati Loudreds. 7 kills, 4 deaths, and a +3 differential. After that, we have a 3-way tie for 6th place between Feraligatr of the Long Island Reggie Rockies, Mega Lopunny of the San Francisco Arcan Niners, and Mega Pinsir of the San Francisco Giants, all of which remain at 6 kills, 1 death, and a +5 differential. For the last 2, we have a 2-way tie for 9th place between Garchomp and Sharpedo, Garchomp from the Atlanta Hooluchas, Sharpedo from the New York Yankees, each with 6 kills, 2 deaths, and a +4 differential.
For next week's matches, the first match of next week, we have the Real Maril, coached by Miguel, versus the Cincinnati Loudreds, coached by Mulvone. This one was a really easy one for me to call. Miguel all the way. He has been planning extremely well. He's been playing extremely well, has the better team matchup. Mulvone, he's brought the same team every single time. If he does the same thing, he brings the same 5 or 6 months that he did for these past few weeks, it's going to be pretty strong in Miguel's favor. I still see it being at least a 3-0 for Miguel.
I 100% agree, especially Uzi will be going over this in the team transaction, but Mulvone recently dropped his Umbreon and Empoleon, and in the process picked up Fortress as well as Gastrodon. Fortress now being his only real way of hazard removal. Miguel now having a spin blocker. This trade, maybe it'll help him in future matches. It does not help him in this match. I agree. Miguel has switch-ins for his offense. Mulvone does not have switch-ins for Miguel's offense, as Mulvone never has switches for anyone's offense. So yeah, this is an easy one for me as well. I'm giving it to Miguel.
Yeah, not much to say about that.
Not at all. Next up, we have the match between the San Francisco Arcan Niners and the Sacramento Sea Kings. This is a pretty tough one for me, but I think I'm going to give it to George. There are definitely... It seems like Hayden has a switch into some of the offense George has, but George hasn't really cared about team matchups lately. He's been, whatever's the problem for me, Gothitelle, you're going to kill it, and then I'm just going to do my thing. Mega Lopunny is going to be a major issue for the Mega Sableye, obviously, with Stab, High Jump Kicker, Drain Punch that can hit it super effective with Scrappy. Of course, he does have the switch into the Slowbro, as well as the Clefable. Crawdaunt is something he doesn't really have a switch into. Life Orb Crawdaunt knocks out Tornadus 100% after Stealth Rocks, can knock out the Hitmonlee, knocks off the Porygon too. That's going to be a major issue every time he's in with Clefable. That's just a free knockoff. So I am going to give this one to George.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. George is planning just extremely well. He knows what he needs to do to win the match, and I think Hayden's kind of faltering his prep. Maybe the past 2 weeks was just kind of a hiccup for him, but he's kind of fallen to the same thing Mulvone has, and he brings the same things pretty much every week. That's going to be easy to plan for, and he's really going to have to think outside the box, pull out some really interesting sets if he's going to stand a chance against George. If not, I see this as being a victory for George pretty handily. The next match is the St. Louis Rampardos, coached by Dan, aka Drive, versus the Pittsburgh Piratas, coached by Old Man Tup. This is an interdivision match, and a pretty important one, because whoever wins this one gets ahead. But I'm going to give this one to Dan. His planning, this past week he did lose to a kind of hacksy battle. I think he's going to really pull it back this week. His planning, to me, is better than Tup's. He knows what he also knows what he needs to win. It's very hard to play against Dan. Like a lot of coaches say, he's very hard to predict. He makes really interesting sets. You know, they're kind of out there, but they work really well for him. So I'm going to give it to Dan. I think Tup can still win. Excadrill is going to be a little bit of a problem for Dan. He doesn't have the safest switch in besides Uxie, but I think it's going to be a close match, but I think Dan can pull it out.
I agree. I'm actually going to go with the St. Louis Rampardos as well. Not because of team matchup, because I actually think that Tup does have the team advantage. Like you said, Excadrill is a huge issue to his team. Adamant Life Orb, 2 KOs, Quagsire, no problem. The only real safe switch-ins he has are Uxie and Salamence. Salamence, if it's a bulky Intimidate set, Rock Slide is not 2 KO. Both of which are dealt with very easily by Tyranitar. In fact, Tyranitar can even get rid of Uxie with Pursuit. Not get rid of, because Uxie is very bulky, but can Pursuit Trap the Uxie, weaken it heavily. That way his Excadrill can sweep. But I'm going to give it to Dan because, again, he is very hard to predict. And I overall think that with his team, with Blastoise being able to deal with the Arcanine, that is an issue for Victini. I think Dan is going to plan his way to victory. I think he's going to get around the threats on Tup's team.
Yeah, he's very good in this format. I think not as many people give him the credit he really deserves.
Next up, we have the Borussia Donphan going up against the San Francisco Giantes. I am going to give this one to Lars. I think Gio has been playing his Entei very well. I think he's been catching his opponents off guard very well. But once again, Lars, excellent planner, absolutely nothing against Gio at all. I just think it's kind of a tough call, but I think that Lars' offense just kind of gets through Gio. Landorus Eye outspeeds, can knock out the Entei. Azumarill out priority Aqua Jet, going to be an issue for him. He has the Slowking, which, even if it is carrying Solar Beam again, is not going to be able to one-shot the Slowking because Slowking has very, very good special defense. If Gio brings the same Entei set, Sunny Day Solar Beam, the Slowking can just paralyze if it wants to. It can actually take a Solar Beam in the sun because it is extremely bulky, and even if it is the normal physical set, Stone Edge is not going to 2-hit KO, Sacred Fire is not going to 2-hit KO. I think Lars is going to have the responses to Gio's team, and I think Gio is going to have a hard time versus it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. Man, we're disagreeing on everything this week. I think Lars is going to pull out the win. Is this the first week that someone actually sets up Stealth Rocks on Gio? Maybe, maybe not. I don't see why not, but apparently these past 4 weeks, they see Mega Pinsir and Entei and think, Rocks aren't going to be that useful. But Lars just has the better team matchup. Gio's wall court just gets pretty much picked apart by a Landorus. Like, what honestly switches into it? Maybe AV Amoonguss, but even still, it's not going to want to take 2 Life Orb Sheer Force Psychics. I think Lars has the better team matchup. Gio, he's been playing very well. I don't think Weakness Policy Sunny Day Entei is going to catch anyone else off guard because they've already seen it. So I can see Lars pulling out a pretty good victory. Set up the rocks, man.
You know what he's going to do? Weakness Policy, Hip out on, take a Grass Knot from the Landorus Ice Thing. Game over.
Next match is the Arizona Deoxys, coached by Gubbs, versus the Boston Red Sox, coached by Nick. Gonna have to just definitely give this one to Nick and the Boston Red Sox. Better team matchup, better player. Gubbs obviously is struggling a lot this season. He knows it. Everyone knows it. Can Gubbs pull out a victory? I think he can, but Nick did take home a pretty big loss this past week. But I think he's going to pull it around. I think Gubbs, even with his more offensive team, is going to have a problem dealing with Skarmory, Cress, and Mega Audino, as well as some of the offensive threats like Tornadus Eye, Nidoking. He doesn't have any switch-ins for Nidoking. Manaphy just kind of runs shop. So Nick, It was a bad loss last week, but I think he's going to pull out a big win this week.
Yep, I agree. I'm going to predict that Nick will win this match, although I am definitely rooting for Gubbs to win because I do want to see Gubbs take down a very strong opponent such as Nick.
Mm-hmm.
I think he definitely can do it. With the addition of Sludge Bomb on Zorak, the wall core you just said, Skarmory, Crest, Megaudino, he does have the ability to hit all of those super effectively, so that could be something that would be interesting. But if Gubbs plays well, he can do it, so I'm rooting for him. I just don't think he's going to beat Nick. Next up, we have a match between the Milwaukee Sawsbucks and the Long Island Reggi Rockies. This is a match that I'm going to be giving to Nips. Team matchup, Chansey deals with every special threat ever can take. It's one of the few things that can kind of deal with Mega Gardevoir, physically defensive, can take 2 Psyshocks. Steve does have a few ways around it. Trick Rotom, Trick Sigilyph, Trick anything, etc. Nips has really proven himself to be a very big threat in this league. Steve has been struggling the entire season. He has not won a game. He knows he has been struggling, and he has not changed the thing in his game that is causing him to struggle, and that is up to him to determine and fix. This could be the match where he figures out exactly what he's been doing wrong, and this is the match where he turns everything around. Nips has been playing well, and it would be a pretty big confidence booster to beat someone on a tear, but I am still going to give this one to Nips.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. Nips really impressed me this past week. Really, really did. The way he's been using his different mons, Diggersby, Whimsicott, I'm very impressed by that. And Nips, I think, is also another one that he's gotten much better. People still kind of sleep on him, though. Yeah, they look at his past record in GBA Season 4 and like, he's not going to be that big of a threat. But he's been doing really well. And against someone like Steve, who's not been doing well this season, I'm sorry to say, I'd love to see Steve winning his matches. But I'm going to give this one to Nips. I think it's going to be another close match. Steve's matches, though, despite his losing record, he may have 4 losses. He still doesn't have the worst differential. Like, his matches have been very close. Can he pull out the win? I think he can. He just has to plan very well. I think Nips is going to win, but I really want to see Steve win this match.
Yeah, in order for Steve to win, his planning's got to be good, his playing has got to be good, and he's got to get that sponsorship from Monster Energy, so good luck with that, Steve.
The second to last battle of the week, we have the New Orleans Pelipers, coached by John, versus the Detroit Steelwings, coached by Crimson. John has been playing very well. His team is extremely threatening, very hard to plan for, and I think John's going to be able to pull it out this week. He's been playing extremely well. There's really nothing to say much about John besides the fact that he's 3 wins, 1 loss. He's got a very threatening team. He has now a Piloswine. Is it ever going to make an appearance? I don't know. But Crimson not playing nearly as well. Team roster is just kind of... It's not as hard to plan for, at least on John's part. I want to see Crimson win this. If Crimson wins this, I'll be so happy for him. I don't want to see any team go winless. But John, he's just been playing too well these past few weeks, and I'm going to say it's going to be a decent victory for John.
Yep, I agree. I think the Detroit Steelwings team actually matches up a little bit better than the Pelipers. Not by too much, but by a little bit. Pretty much every week, Crimson does not have a win yet. Pretty much every week, there's been something in his planning that has just been off. Offensive Assault Best Audino was the first one. No Thunder Punch on Fernape was another one. It really seems like these faults in planning are kind of the preceding factor to his defeat. If he can maybe spend a little bit more time looking over, hey, does this work against this? Can this hit everything it possibly can? Then I think he can do it. But John has been playing better. I do expect John to play well again, and I do expect John to win.
The last match of the week is the Atlanta Hooluchas, coached by Fizzy, versus the New York Yankees, coached by Shady. I will give this match to the Atlanta Hooluchas. He did take home his first loss, but I'm still on the Fizz train. He had a very, very hard team to plan for this past week, and Shady, I say, what kind of switches into Mega Charizard? Why? He had a problem switching into a special Entei. I think he's going to have a hard time switching in to Mega Charizard Y. Especially if you can consider it can carry almost perfect coverage for his team. It's going to be a good battle. I think it's going to be very close. And Shady can win it. His Firewater Grass core is just, it is very hard to break through. But Fizz has the wall breakers needed to break through, so I will give it to Fizz.
So I think this will be the first time that Berk and I disagree. I think Shady is actually going to pull out the victory here. Yes, Charizard Y is an issue, as Charizard Y always is, but when you look at his team, Mismagius, Alakazam, Sharpedo, after Speed Boost, will all be able to outspeed Zard Y, potentially revenge kill it. Rotom Heat can take any one hit from it, hit it back with a Stab Thunderbolt. Jirachi could be... Jirachi at worst will speed tie with it. If it is Scarfed, can hit it with maybe a random Ancient Power. Won't one-shot, but it will do a good amount of damage. Mega Venusaur also can take one Fire Blast in the sun, just because Mega Venusaur is extremely bulky, and in combination with that thick fat maybe return with the Rock Slide. And Melodic, 2 KO by Solar Beam, but if Shady pulls out a very well-timed Mirror Coat, then that would be the end of Mega Charizard Y. I'm going to give this one to Shady. I think he's going to pull this one out.
And that is going to wrap up the Week 4 weekly recap for the GBA Season 5. Very, very good battles this week. I was very surprised by some of the outcomes. I did not thought Hayden was going to take it. Everyone on the Pick'em crew thought Hayden was going to take it, but really proved us wrong. And I'm looking forward to a lot of the matches next week. Granted, some of them easier to call than this past week, but I'm hoping to get surprised again this week. That's all we got for today. My name's Berk.
I'm Monotooi.
We'll see y'all next time.